punchy. I'm going to talk a little bit about robots in the context of this conference, which is, of course, in 2 words. I'll say more than 2 words, but the 2 words we're supposed to focus on for this panel are the word cyber, which of course refers to the characteristic and culture of computers, information technology, and virtual reality, as well as health. The state of being free of illness or injury. And I could think of no better way to combine these 2 words, cyber health, than to show you one of the technologies that some of my forthcoming research is on. I don't think the sound is plugged in, so it's important for you to hear the Google banjo in the background. So we're getting to a point in robotics now where we're about to see, we're on the precipice of some fairly significant changes in the health sector. What you're watching here, I think, is quite remarkable, as I can tell by how captivated you are at watching the screen rather than looking at me, which is good, because that was part of my plan here. But in thinking about this, what you're watching here is a robotic device that's called the Da Vinci. And the Da Vinci is still a machine which really, I think, reflects our early notions of cyber, which is this idea that the technology mediates the transactions that people do, and in this case, the transaction that a surgeon would do as they're performing a surgery. But I think it's also sort of important to think about this in terms of where we're heading. And where we're heading is to a world where these semi-autonomous machine systems, which are still run with the human being in the loop, you can see they can operate in small quarters, are more and more becoming automated. And we're getting to the point where we're going to remove the human being from the loop. We're not there yet. This is what the Da Vinci looks like. And as I say, it's a good example of cyber in the context of health. And one of the things that's amazing is the extent to which the technology is there now. We're getting cyber right from a technological perspective. And we certainly had better as we enter theaters of this sort, the surgery theater. And so what I want to think about is that even if we do get the cyber right, in other words, the technology is there, as we move forward with AI and robotics, we have to think really carefully about law and policy because of some of the special characteristics that AI and robotics bring forward. So I'm going to talk in my brief time about 3 different characteristics. First, I'm going to talk about autonomy. In other words, in this case, the machines becoming more and more autonomous and not requiring human intervention or oversight. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the characteristic of emergence, the idea that AIs in particular, but robots that are driven by AI, are at a point where some of their behaviors and activities are ones which we don't normally expect. Some of their behavior is unpredictable. And third, I want to talk a little bit about where we're heading with some robots, which is in terms of giving them the characteristic of sociality. The idea that these machines are becoming social. The purpose is to create relationships between the machines and people. And there's some very interesting implications that law and policy will have to contemplate in thinking these through. So let's start with the first one, with autonomy. The idea here is that we have a system which involves a doctor as really the driver of the system. And the system intermediates the surgery, allows it to be much more precise. But at the same time, where we're heading more and more is to an era where we're going to take that surgeon out of the picture, right? And this is not just about the robots making their own sandwiches. This is about a set of arguments that we're going to see that says by taking the human out of the loop, what we'll ultimately be doing is moving towards more safe systems, more efficient systems, ones which are more profitable and have a better bottom line. We've seen that in the airline industry already. We all know that the pilot is there to tell you what the weather is like in the next city and maybe to be around in case there's a landing that takes place. We're about to see it in the next 5 or 10 years with driverless vehicles as we let go of the wheel and allow more and more autonomy to the cars that drive us around. It's interesting to think about whether we're going to get there with surgery. There's no reason to think that those technologies couldn't provide the same level of precision and specificity, but it might take a kind of different leap of faith when you're sitting underneath this machine than when you're sitting behind the vehicle, but maybe not. We'll see. In any event, I think one of the important things to recognize is as we have more and more machine autonomy, we have less and less human control. That's a choice that we're going to make. And I think, as I've said already, we're going to see that sooner and sooner with driverless vehicles. So should those vehicles have an override capability, as the legislation that Canada is currently contemplating, thinking about drafting, would suggest? And how do we make the leap from situations where we give the machine more autonomy to letting go of some of that kind of control? One aspect of this that's related to the idea of relinquishing human control, of course, is the second characteristic that I want to talk about, and that is this characteristic of emergence. The notion of emergence recognizes that as we program machines to be more autonomous, the kind of algorithms that drive that autonomy are of a sort that would make it so that the machine behaves unpredictably. Okay? It has emergent characteristics that we only come to learn about as we experience the machine. In other words, the machine is unpredictable by its design. Unpredictability is a feature, not a bug. Okay? We saw that this week for those of you who are nerds in the audience, and I'm looking at a few of them as we speak as I put this slide up. For those of you who've been following DeepMinds, one of the company that Google acquired in the last couple of years as a major AI acquisition, has been in the headlines a lot for having just defeated the Grandmaster at the game of Go. Every 10 years or so, we have human being champions taking on machine systems at different games. Go was thought to be sort of the last possibility where the humans would have the advantage, because Go is an incredibly complex game in a way that requires human intuition and not just sort of linear computational ability. So whereas up until now, the kinds of techniques that AI has been using rely on brute force and processing capability, now we start to see that with DeepMinds, the AI is actually capable of making intuitive moves. And in game 2 of this match, which just occurred a couple of days ago, AlphaGo, DeepMind's Go-playing AI, made a move which was described as one which no human being would make. It's referred to as Move 37 if you want to Google it later and see it. It was described as a rare and intriguing shoulder hit. And at first, the people of DeepMinds thought that a mistake was happening. But later, as it was described by one of the commentators, who's a leading figure in this game, said, it's not a human move. I've never seen a human play this move, he says. So beautiful. A word he kept repeating, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And so one of the things we start to see here is that there is this, this is something that the people from Deep Blue were not predicting. First of all, DeepMinds was not predicting that this machine would win and defeat the human, and they were certainly not predicting some of these moves along the way. And it's that unpredictability, the emergence, that I think becomes very interesting as we allow these algorithms to do things like drive cars for us. So just in thinking about that move in particular, we've seen another instance in the last couple of years. Some of you will recognize this as IBM's Watson, which also defeated the human champions in the game of Jeopardy, a game that requires natural language ability and relies on puns and plays on words. And machine systems are now capable of using natural language. But during that match, there was one point at which the clue that was given was about a US airport. And IBM's Watson chimed in and said, "What is Toronto?" And this emergent behavior, which was unexpected, just like the Go move that I just described, was one that took the programmers days and weeks afterwards to try to reconstruct what actually was going on there. This property of emergence is, I think, particularly important as we start to see headlines like this one 2 years ago. IBM's Watson is better at diagnosing cancer than human doctors. So we start to think about this, and we start to think, what happens when that machine system develops a far superior track record for predicting and diagnosing cancer. There are evidence-based reasons to follow what IBM's Watson is saying with regard to a medical diagnosis. So when we think about this, if we imagine looking forward at this, we can only imagine there still being a human in the loop. We're not going to relinquish all control to the machine systems. So there's going to be some doctor, the physician with primary responsibility for the file in question. And they're going to consult Watson as a kind of instrument or machine in the doctor's toolkit. But there are going to come times where there's going to be human-robot disagreement, namely where Watson says to do one thing and the doctor thinks in their heart they should be doing something else. At the same time, Watson will have proven this incredible track record that no human being is able to match. And we'll get to the point where the doctor in charge really faces what I think of as an existential dilemma, right? This is Abraham on the mountain, hearing the voice and not knowing what to do in a kind of way. And so in thinking about where we're heading in terms of relinquishing control in the face of emergent technology, it raises really interesting legal questions around responsibility. I'm not going to get in deep into the legal questions because we're trying to keep this punchy and short, but I will suggest, as some of my writing, if anyone's interested in looking at it, that this leads to a paradox of the sort that Isaac Asimov might have imagined. And it goes like this. The normative pull that would lead to the decision to delegate to the intelligent machine, namely evidence-based reasoning, will generate a system where we now have no obvious evidentiary rationale for explaining the outcome that was generated by the intelligent machine. And the idea here is that the machines themselves, as they become emergent, as they engage in machine learning, generate outcomes that their programmers cannot explain. So we no longer have a scientific rationale that supports or justifies the algorithm. The algorithm is justified only on the basis of its success. But its success, of course, is no longer a causal or scientific story that can be empirically tested. It's only one that can be sort of demonstrated to have shown a good run of luck up until now. And I think that that's going to generate some real serious interest in terms of thinking about how do we assess liability? How do we think about responsibility when things go wrong? And in hindsight, we see that things are 20/20. But really, in assessing these things from a policy perspective, it's deeper than that. I'd like to say some more about that, and perhaps there'll be a time in the question period if anybody's interested. But I want to save just a couple of minutes as I close here by talking about the last emergent quality, the last quality of robotics, and that is sociality. What we're seeing more and more is that robots and artificial intelligence systems are being designed in a way to exploit a human tendency, which is the tendency of anthropomorphism. Okay? We tend to treat machines and other inanimate objects sometimes as though they have human qualities. We name them that way. We sometimes talk to them that way. And this is something that has been understood for a long period of time. What's different and what's happening now is that tendency towards anthropomorphism is now being instantiated in a set of empirical sciences, one field known as affective computing, where the idea is that we take this tendency and we figure out how to design so that people will be more anthropomorphic to the machine. And it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of the user, right? If we want to make these things usable, we make the machine systems in a way that people connect with them and people trust them. And so I thought I'd show you one example of a robot that's about to hit the market this year, a robot by the name of Pepper, and one which Neil deGrasse Tyson had the opportunity to meet recently at the Clinton Global Initiative. So.
For example, I'm interested in working in healthcare and helping the elderly. My body language and understanding of basic emotions allow me to naturally communicate with people. And I also like to think I'm pretty charming. When I connect to the cloud, I have the ability to pull endless information from the internet. Want to know the symptoms of the chicken pox? Oops, that was the wrong thing. There we go. I can find it all.
It's great. Pepper, give me some more examples of how you can help.
I can use my internet connection to make family, friends, or doctors feel closer. I can play silly games to test your memory, eyesight, or even your flexibility, as well as entertaining you during shots or exams. I have a great memory for when you should take your pills, or when your kids are coming to visit. The possibilities are really endless.
I see. I see.
Kind of an awkward set of interactions there, but I think the thing to understand here is, unlike a lot of these kinds of demonstrations, Pepper's not scripted there. That is not a script that was programmed in. That is emergent discussion, including the mistake of when Pepper found the wrong item on the internet and acted genuinely surprised afterwards when that was corrected. So as we start to see what's going on here, I think it's useful to think of what's the robotics company, Aldebaran Robotics, is doing here, right? They're taking the world's most famous astrophysicist, branding that sort of understanding, deep, big mind in science, and branding that around the Clinton Global Initiative as a way of basically saying we can trust these robots to do elder care. And as we start to think about these things, I think what we'll see and what we have to pay attention to is the idea that the more that we trust machine systems, the more we'll be willing to delegate various tasks that were used to fall exclusively within the human domain, important human tasks and decision making. And so one of the things that I'm doing in my research on health and elderly care that I'm not going to spend any more time at except in the question period is this question about what is anthropomorphic design, what should its limits be, and what should the role of law be. So in thinking about this, I've titled my piece Robots and Their Human Counterparts. And I guess one of the things I want to think about is this duality of the word counterpart. A counterpart can be somebody's colleague, it can be somebody's opposite, but a counterpart is also something which ultimately becomes insignificant because it's mass-produced and we don't even think about all the counterparts that make up the world around us. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about when I think about cyber health, and I'm happy to turn the floor over to our next speaker. Thank you very much.